With the recent announcement of a sequel, I thought I'd look back at an oft-forgotten early superhero film, The Rocketeer, which is also celebrating its 30th birthday this year. Directed by Joe Johnston, who would perhaps not coincidentally go on to direct the first Captain America film for the MCU, the film follows Cliff Secord, a stunt pilot who stumbles upon a jetpack. Based on a comic book from the early 80s, the film was released in 1991 to mixed reviews and was a box office bomb. Still, it developed a solid cult following and is generally well regarded in the greater film community, except by Seth MacFarlane apparently.
When Texas people want to feel good,
They go assault a queer.
when stupid people need a thrill.
They rent the Rocketeer.
Yeesh. Like the classic adventure serials of old, you have a clear-cut hero, some villains, and a relatively simple plot surrounding a MacGuffin represented by the Rocket Pack. Where the film shines, however, is its script. Not necessarily the dialogue, which is adequate, but it features a lot of setups and payoffs. I won't go into all of them since this is a mini review, but the many setups and payoffs helped keep the movie interesting and gave me, the audience, something fun and interesting to pay attention to. As for its structure, it's about as cut and dry as you can get. Very simple 3-act structure following the basic construction of an average screenplay to a T. The story is also pretty simplistic, nothing worth writing home about, but there are one or two fun twists that do help elevate the movie, like Neville Sinclair being a Nazi. While this is technically a comic book movie, I actually felt more of a connection to movies like Indiana Jones and the types of films and stories that influenced that series, though perhaps the inclusion of Nazis helped give me those feels. As for the special effects, they're definitely a problem in regard to it holding up. The film released just a few years before CGI started to get used more in Hollywood. With that said, the movie did come out only a couple weeks before Terminator 2, which featured some CGI that holds up pretty dang well. I mean, T2 was the most expensive film ever made upon release, but The Rocketeer also had a pretty large budget at $40 million. Oh well. I'm sure Industrial Light and Magic was just too busy doing the CGI on T2 to work on The Rocketeer. Oh wait! They weren't, because ILM did do the special effects for The Rocketeer as well. I mean, I'm sure CG would have been expensive, especially for these sort of flying scenes and such, but the results look incredibly dated. Instead, they went with stop motion, or more specifically, go motion, which adds a motion blur to give it a more realistic look, but your eye still can definitely see something's off. Obviously, dated effects are far from the best judge of a film's quality, but in terms of how a modern audience might enjoy this film, especially ones who like modern comic book movies, many of the effects will come off as somewhat laughable. I mean, would CG have made the movie better? No, but maybe it'd be talked about more or remembered more fondly if it was one of the earlier movies to use the technology.
It's the Flying Man!
It's the Rocketeer.
The music was done by James Horner and is definitely a standout that helps the movie a lot, and I'd play some, but YouTube's copyright system is an absolute monster that has no regard to the legality of fair use, so I won't. But how do we say whether this movie holds up or not? This is a PG-rated family film, so comparing it to the modern glut of comic book movies that are generally rated PG-13, or even R, maybe isn't the fairest thing to do. I mean, but with that in mind, if you're a fan of the modern era of comic book movies, this one definitely won't scratch your itch. It's really more of an Indiana Jones-esque swashbuckling action-adventure film that happens to follow a similar structure to a standard superhero origin story. Neville Sinclair was in part inspired by Errol Flynn, perhaps best known for his swashbuckling films from the era when The Rocketeer takes place even. I actually feel like this could be a really solid introduction to movies for younger kids. Like, if your kids are too young to experience Raiders of the Lost Ark, which has some genuinely gruesome imagery, but maybe they're ready to handle something with a little more weight than a Pixar movie, I think The Rocketeer is a fantastic choice for that purpose. I think if I'd seen it when I was 7 or 8, I would have really enjoyed it. For adults, and especially movie buffs, this one is probably worth skipping. It's not as bad as Seth MacFarlane seems to think it is, but if you're like me and your watch list is approximately 6 billion movies long, I don't see much reason to recommend watching The Rocketeer. So, does The Rocketeer hold up? I'm gonna go with it depends. I think this could be a fantastic gateway movie for younger kids because the script is much more clever than 99% of other movies, especially children's movies, and they'll pick up on that, if only subconsciously, and the parents watching the movie with their kids will be engaged well enough. But if you're a regular old movie buff and have heard of this movie vaguely and want to know whether it's worth your time, I'm gonna have to say no. Not a bad film by any means, but there are better options for your time in 2021.
Go get him, kid.
If you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments what movie or video game you'd like to see done next. Thanks for watching.